Good evening. In today's episode of Combustion RC, we're going to be upgrading the MT12. I have a shock set here from STRC, diff covers, steering block, and rear lockout. These are all from STRC. I also have some 100K diff fluid because we're going to lock the diffs and make this thing drive like a real monster truck. Obviously, real monster trucks have open diffs, but they tend to have a lot more bite, and so we're going to make that one a solid axle, more like what a crawler would be, so that it has more bite. Since they are fluid-filled diffs, we can put 100K in there and essentially do the same thing. So that's what we're going to do in today's video. Let's go ahead and grab the MT12, get you facing down so we can see what we got, get digging into this thing, because I'm not sure what we're getting into either, because this is going to be the first time I've really ever torn it apart for real. Let's get into the truck, shall we? Alright, so the first thing that I did to the MT12 is I did remove some stickers. Now I just used a hair dryer and just heated up the sticker enough that I could peel off the factory stickers, because I'm sure, as you've noticed in some of my previous videos, there's been guitars in the background and I am a musician, so I have a lot of Sweetwater stickers, and I thought what better thing to do than make a Sweetwater delivery van. This side turned out great. I got a little carried away with the hair dryer on the other side, and well, every 80s conversion van has the dent in the sliding door, right? Now this one does too. Yeah, got my Sweetwater delivery van complete with dent. So let's tilt down and get into the truck here and see what kind of trouble we can get ourselves into, because you know, 4-link and stuff that is like a crawler that I haven't worked on for 8 years, because 6 years, because I've done all racing stuff. So let's get into it and learn together. So just like usual, I'm going to have you tilted down here. For this one, I don't know what we're going to do. Let's take the body off and just start looking. I know we're going to do the diffs first because we have to take the lockouts and the steering blocks off to get to the diffs, I believe, because I think we have to take the axles out of it. Oh yes, as you can see here, there is a Traxxas receiver in here now. The Fortec came with that cheap TQ setup, which is just clicky click and steering trim. I wanted the radio and receiver that was in this to be put in the Fortec until I can get my Futaba radio system, because it has in-point adjustments for steering and throttle, whereas this TQ was literally just steering, throttle, and then you have steering trim. There is no adjustments for your endpoint on anything. I put it in here because this doesn't really need endpoint adjustment. I went ahead and did that, took the lighter and bent this over so that it was ready. So that's why you're seeing this in here. It is not an upgrade, it's just there because I wanted the radio system in this for the Fortec to race indoor, because you can change out the radio. And like I said, I don't have my Futaba stuff yet, and I couldn't for the life of me find a reason why I should run a TQ system and race when there's a slightly better radio sitting on the shelf that was for this, that the boy's going to run, and he's not going to care if it's got the TQ radio system on it. That is why you're seeing that in there. I'm going to go ahead and tuck this through just so it's clean. All right, let's get into it. Looks like we have to start taking off some goodies. Yeah, let's first start by taking off the wheels. For that, of course, you're going to use your 7mm wheel wrench, which is just a 7mm nut driver. And we can finally get a nice look at those nice big steel 12mm hexes that are in there too. Or cast aluminum, I'm not sure what they are, but they're big and they're metal, so at least that's a plus. Now, one thing I did notice on this is the lockouts are already actually getting loose and wallered out. These aluminum lockouts are definitely a positive for that, because it looks like the lockouts are actually walling out on the lockout side, not the axle side. Probably ran about 15 or 20 packs through this thing, probably closer to 20. Alright, so we'll move our tires aside, and as we can see when we get down here, we essentially have a crawler chassis. Once we take those wheels off, you can really tell it's just a crawler chassis. Let's do the front first because it seems to be the most complex. Probably the easiest way to do this will be to unscrew from the servo horn itself. Go ahead and slide our axle pins and hexes off. We are going to have to actually take it off of here, so might as well do that first, right? Grab our 2mm. This does have a nut on the bottom of it. 5.5 as well. It's not a 5.5. Is that a 5? It is a 5. I'm glad I have this Aeromax set that has a 5. I honestly never thought I'd use that. And there's a reason I'm using hand tools on this and not the power tools, is because I want these nylon strings to be able to come off easily and not be basically melted onto the screws. And since I am just doing the first thing on this, and this is all going to be going into aluminum, I do not want those to be stuck. That would be awful. Then you gotta take an X-Acto knife and you gotta, oh my. Because if those are stuck, then you gotta take an X-Acto knife and you gotta clean up all the threads before you can get everything else on. Alright, so we got that on. We had to use some channel locks to grab the link because it was just on there so tight. Very tight on there, and it just was spinning inside there. So finally got that off. So that's a good thing. Go ahead and take our shocks off just so that they're not there anymore. You know what? We are going to use power tools. It's going to take too long. I know I said I wasn't going to, but I only have nap time to do this, and then it's a matter of the kids all waking up, and then I run out of time. Alright, and as you can tell, all 4 shocks are the same. So that'll be pretty easy to figure out what's what. We do have to use some of the parts from these to do our new ones, so just have to make sure that we get our shocks aside. But our shocks are now off. Now let's continue working on the front section. If you're wondering why this is all wobbly like that, don't use your speed tips as pry bars. That's why. Alright, so we got our rear axle off. Got our front axle off. Now we can go ahead and set what's left of our truck aside. Do the front axle first. It is really nice to see bearings in here because a lot of your $200 price ranges tend to have just bushings, like brass bushings, so that's really nice to see. Well, these are even top hat screws. The reason they call them top hat screws, if you look there, it looks like it has a little top hat. And remember on these, when you take them off, that your links don't go to the back like you would think that they would. The link points go to the front. That's the only thing on crawlers you do have to remember that's a little off. So then, pull our steering block off, pull our axle out. You have to pull your axle out because you can't get your center diff out without the axle out. And apparently axle spacers. Or one axle spacer. So then we'll go ahead and take our screws out of our center diff. I mean our front diff. There's our other axle spacer. Then this cover pops right off. As you can see, we got plastic gears. Not a whole lot of grease on there, surprisingly. Let's go ahead and punch up these bearings. The reason I use a 1.5 is so I can get to that inside edge to pop that inner one out. That one wasn't bad because it just fell out. Now, these are not sealed bearings, so I do recommend if you're going to do this, go ahead and get the factory team sealed bearings. I thought these were. Had I realized if they were open bearings, I probably would have got the sealed bearings to put in here. But you live and learn. So let's go ahead and set the bearings for our differential over there. Now, like I said, since this is basic stuff, we're not going to go crazy. No power tools on this Delrin. This Delrin is actually surprisingly durable. That's what this white plastic is. It's like a nylon plastic. That is nice to see. Let's go ahead and take a look inside here and see what the inside of these look like. Alright, so here's the inside. There's our sun gear, and it's just more of that black grease. Blacky blue grease that's in there. It's quite literally all it is. It is sealed. There is a paper gasket there. Since it is just a very small amount of grease that's in there, don't really want to mess with it too much. I'm just going to try to pull some of this out without pulling it all apart. I am glad to see metal gears on the inside though. These are all metal gears. So the only one that's not metal is our ring gear, because our pinion gear is also metal. But at least this one's Delrin. So then we're going to open our 100K weight fluid, which as you can tell, it's thick enough that it doesn't give you a spout. How do I want to do this? I'm going to use my 2.5 rounded head, because I feel like that might be like a spoon. Oh yeah, there's our 100K fluid. Now we're just going to try to dip that down in there. So that is now in. Set this gear back on there. Make sure you get 2 of these lined up and snug them in. Now what you notice is on these, unlike your short course trucks, you don't have to line up any pins or like splines that are inside there to get these to go back together, because the output shafts actually have a flat spot on them, and the output shafts go inside of here, and so there's no outdrive. Your axle shaft isn't like a real car axle shaft that goes into the differential, instead of connecting to an outdrive on the outside of it. That's why they call them axle shafts and not dog bones or CVDs. So that's sealed up. And there you go. You can see that flat side versus not flat side that's keyed, that goes down inside of there. And these go in each side like so. And we'll just give it a little twisty twist to make sure we seat that fluid in there. That is much tighter, so it's going to actually drive a lot better now. It's still an open diff, but it's not going to be wide open. It's going to be really nice. Put our bearings back on, get our black grease out, and you can tell there's only one way to drop it in because of the way that it's beveled. So you just drop it right in. I'm going to clean our hand off real quick. The reason we want to get our hands cleaned off is because now we're putting this guy on here. Now normally if I am screwing into aluminum, I'm like, make sure you thread lock the tar out of that thing. But because this is on what is essentially a crawler chassis, we want to make sure that it is secure, which it has 4 screws that hold this cap on. So it is secure, but we also want to make sure, most of all, that it's easy to remove once it's time to actually remove it. Because one thing I have learned over the years with crawlers is it's not a matter of if you break them, but when you break them. So you put them under a lot of stress, even if they are ones like this, where you're like not really crawling. So that one's seated in there. Put our spacer back on this one. Remember, you've got your lower links and your upper links, so make sure you're getting it set in there good and the right way. Then these are identical, top and bottom. Bearings fit nicely in those. That is one thing I like about STRC, is they are not the most expensive aluminum brand out there, but they're usually well machined, where bearings are a perfect fit. The great thing about these top hat screws is they physically will not let you over tighten. Once you get to the point where they are actually fully tightened, they still leave a little bit of a gap for those arms to move. See? Nice and clean. We won't worry about our pins and hexes just yet, because those will not go on until the wheels can go on to actually hold them in place. And in order for them to be held into place, they have to be able to have the links on them, which we have to get on without the tires on. But we can't put the links on until the shocks are done. So we're just going to rebuild our axles, and then we'll move to the shocks. Just use our 1.5 to wiggle that through to make sure she's lined up good. And drop our pin through. Tighten it up. Alright, and that's pretty much it. The rears are actually going to be easier because we don't have steering blocks in the rears, they're just the lockout. So let's go ahead and move to the rears. First things first, actually we don't have to take this off. I don't know why I did on the front one. Now I'm purposefully doing this one backwards so that I can show you what I mean by you have to take the outdrives off first. So I know you guys who actually done this before are probably like, why did you just take that off first? Because I want to show people that without taking the axles out, this won't come out, because it is actually held in by these axles. So now we take our axles out by taking our hexes off, pull the pin, take our hex off, pull the pin. Then we have to unscrew our outdrives. Sorry, not our outdrives, our lockouts. Now our lockouts are unscrewed. We'll give those a little wiggle and a pull. For being as loose as they are, you'd think they would pop right off. There it goes. And there's that one. Alright, so just like the front, the rear has a bearing here, but nothing on the outside. It's only an internal bearing. because lockouts don't have an external bearing. We'll set that to the side with our other plastic parts. Push the other axle in. Make sure the bearing stayed on, which it did, so that's good. This one even still has the sleeve on it, so that means this one's stuck. There it goes. We'll go ahead and move this to the side as well. Now, you just go, and it rolls right out. Peachy keen. And just like last time, go ahead and pull our bearings off so that we don't lose them, since we have to take it off anyway. You grab your 1.5 millimeter cap off, pull off this guy, make sure you don't slide that spacer on the back, because this one does have a spacer in it to shim it. So there's a little diff shim there. And then same as we did on the front one. All right, that time I've got it. Got some on my finger too. All right, so now we're ready to put it back together. All right, so that part's done. All right, so once you get to this point, then it's just like last time. Go ahead and put your bearings back on. Put your black grease, a little dip on that gear all the way around, drop it right in. Cover our fluids back up. Don't need any more of those. All right, so this is your top, so this means your bottom's gonna be on this side. So to make sure that you put these on like so when you put them on. So they will be pretty snug because you've got a little bit of overlap here where the thing is. That just helps pinch it on. You'll overlap here where the screw goes in, and that helps pinch it on. So then we take our out drive, stick it in there, and get this right down there. If these do start getting weathered out, if you've taken it off too many times, what you can do is you can actually put a dot of tire glue on your screw when you put it in, because tire glue on a metal screw going into plastic works as thread locker on metal and metal. So that's a fun little fact for you. That works good. Our diff works good. Really tight, but it works good. And that's what we want. And there's our rear axle upgraded and ready to go. So next is the shocks. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of all of this diff fluid and sticky stuff. And we'll get out our shocks. Now, like I said, these are going to be fluid-filled shocks that we're removing. So we are going to need our catch pan of sorts. And then, as always, you want to go ahead, since we're building fresh ones, go ahead and take a toothbrush. You're go ahead and just scrub this clean. All right, so now that that's all clean and we've got all four of them here, we can go ahead and start dismantling them and getting them ready to actually rebuild, as we are going to need to use a few of these pieces. Our new ones come with cap, body, collars. But the cool thing about them is, just like your race kits, which have a O-ring inside of the collar, these actually have a little O-ring inside the collar. So I'll show you the trick to making these where they're easy to move and to where they don't just get stuck where you put them, because that O-ring will swell when it gets warm and it just gets stuck. So I'll show you the trick for that as well. So if you notice here, there is what looks like fuel tubing for shock limiters on these. They do get used quite a bit. If you want to make this more like a crawler, you would just take those off and it would increase your flex. So that is something to note on those. The one thing that you will notice with these is, unlike a lot of things that come as a shock kit, these are a shock build kit. So you will have to actually remove some parts from these old ones to use, like our springs and our cups. We'll have to remove our eyelets and our shock and piston. We need all of that for these, as well as our internal bits. That's going to make this a little bit interesting. We're just going to remove this completely just so that they're not in the way. Go ahead and get your new shocks separated so that they're all ready to be built. All right, so let me grab our shock pliers and our 1.5 so we can get in that hole a little easier. And you're just going to take the eyelet and the fuel tubing off of every one of them. Which, quite honestly, I'm not sure if I even want to put the fuel tubing back on, because I wouldn't mind if this had a little bit more flex and did that whole wobbly thing. Surprisingly enough, these are only a 2-part design. A spacer and an O-ring. That is all that's in there. Single spacer and an O-ring. Let's just have, there's an additional spacer stuck to my bottom cap. That is a hat design spacer, so that we will need for sure. It's a single O-ring. Thought there'd be another one in here, but there's not. Very interesting. Okay, and that is our dismantling. I'm gonna clean this up real quick and then we'll get to building. All right, so we're back. We're gonna start building these up. Now, you do want to have something here because, well, quite frankly, you need to have something here, because we're going to be messing with shock fluid. On every shock, we're going to have a spring, cap, bladder, body, piston, a rod end, a spring cup, a collar, a bottom cap, a spacer, O-ring, and a bottom hat spacer. Now that is what you're going to have. You can use the fuel tubing. Personally, I don't like the look of the fuel tubing. I know what its purpose is. It's a bump stop so that you don't hit the body. I'm fine with trimming the body or even raising it up. I would prefer not to use it and have it to where it's more flexy, because I'm actually going to be taking this out on the trails as well. So I'm actually going to throw all of these away. If I want to do this again, I can spend $1 and I can get a whole foot of fuel tubing and do the same thing for a little nothing. So for now, we're just going to build these like this. Now, first things first, you want to take your spacer and drop it in like so. And your O-ring, drop it in. Bottom hat, make sure that the big part of it is inside and then the bevel is towards the top, because the bevel is going to go through the hole in the bottom of your bottom cap. Then you thread on your bottom cap, make sure she looks good, snug it up nice and tight. Now for the shock collar, like I said, it's an O-ring in there, so you're going to have to kind of thread it on. So what I usually do is I take a thin fluid, whatever my thinnest is. Like I said, in this case, it's 27.5. And I just give it a little coating all the way up and down on one spot. Because as I thread this on, it'll actually go, but do a little back thread to make sure we're not cross threading. And it'll help that spin on nicely, just like so. Because if you don't do that, it'll end up being, the rubber will stick to the shock shaft. So then we put our piston, which we're also going to put a little bit of fluid on, just to help it glide in and keep its seal on that O-ring. So I give it a little spin at the top as I push it in, and I spin it as I pull through. So there's that. Then I'm going to go ahead and take my pliers, my shock pliers, and put my rod end on, like so. You can get it to start threading, that's great. And once the rod end is on, go ahead and take a 1/5, whether it be a speed tip or a regular one, and just get it threaded the rest of the way until it's even. And once that is on, then your shock is pretty much back in one piece. So then we're going to go ahead and put our fluid in. So I'm not really worried about bleeding as much as I usually am. So it's going to be good enough because it's going on a 12 scale monster truck that's just going to go out in the trail and crawl. So it doesn't need to be bled. It doesn't need to be, you know, all fancy race car like. Just has to be a shock. So we'll put that on. Put our collar on. And then we'll thread this back down until she's even. Basically, once there's just a touch of tension on there, I'm going to go a little bit more. Now we've got these nice aluminum shocks on there that feel much better than the plastic ones, even with barely making them anything special. All right, and then we're just going to do the same thing to all 4 of them. Yeah, I know I said I wasn't going to bleed those, and I did anyway, but it just felt right. So shocks are done. Now we can start putting the truck back together. First things first, we've got our drive shaft, our upper links, and our lower links. Remember, you're upside down. This is our steering side. So drive shaft, upper links, lower links. Remember which side's which, because these axles will go on either side. So that is something to keep in mind when you're putting back together any type of monster truck or crawler, anything that has a solid axle. So once we get our top links in, now we can grab our center shaft, get it lined up, get this tilted. Go ahead and mount the top part of our shock so that the bottom is a little easier. And I'm actually going to put these on the other hole so that they lean instead of straight up and down. If I can get it to cooperate. We will not have cooperation on that. All right, so there's our rear done. Move on to the front. Now that is ready. Now the front, we can go ahead and put our hexes and our wheels back on. But yeah, that's it. So then you just put your wheels back on and I'll show the finished result here in just a moment. So until next time, keep the rubber side down, the shiny side up, and remember to stay in the groove.